Thank you so much, Amitai, and thank you to everyone at Z3 for everything you've done to just plan this extraordinary event. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here today. So, a few years ago, I was reading an article about an American Supreme Court case, which was deciding whether it was constitutional for a high school football coach to lead Christian prayers with his students on the field at a public high school. Now, the court sided with the coach. And as I imagined this coach holding these public prayer sessions, I thought about how a Jewish football player might feel having to stand off to the side as his... Give it a minute. All right, how's that? We're better? Okay, great. So, okay, we're on the field, we're praying, and I thought about how a Jewish football player might feel having to stand off to the side as his classmates all prayed to Jesus. I thought about how different and uncomfortable he might feel. And I thought to myself, good. And then I thought, no, that is not good at all. That's awful. I don't want some Jewish kid to feel like a guest at his own school, nor do I want a Muslim or a Hindu or an atheist kid to feel that way. I totally disagree with this Supreme Court case. But still, a part of me thinks, good. And the reason I think that is because to be a Jew is to be different. And to be different is to be uncomfortable. And that is okay, because comfort is not the Jewish mission in the world. For many years, Jews here in America have focused a great deal on being comfortable, on fitting in. That was certainly my own story. For most of my life, I went around telling people, I'm Jewish, but not that Jewish. I just like Seinfeld, and I'm kind of anxious. Or, social justice is my Judaism. There's nothing wrong with that, right? We're all cool with social justice, right? What I think I was saying was, don't worry, I'm just like you. I just go to a different church. But I don't even go to my church, and I know that you don't go to your church either. So really, we're the same. We're worldly, progressive, spiritual, but not religious. Now, I was lucky enough to grow up in a part of America without much anti-Semitism. So for most of my life, I could get away with that kind of contentless Jewish identity that was little more than an empty void with a few ethnic jokes rattling around in it. For most of my life, I could be just like everyone else, but with a fun little ethnic twist. And for those of you who grew up in Israel, fitting in meant living by a Jewish calendar, in a Jewish language, learning Jewish history and texts in your public school. So whether you were secular or religious, being a Jew did not exactly make you different. But today, here in America, on our campuses, in our companies and organizations, and even on our streets, we find ourselves singled out for being Jews or Zionists. And that empty void Jewish identity, it's no longer enough. Now, I want to be clear that I think the anti-Semitism we're facing is abhorrent and terrifying and evil, and I wish with every fiber of my being that it would disappear. But I actually don't think it's the worst thing in the world, that it's harder for us to fit in and be like everyone else. As painful as it can be, I think this is an opportunity, not just for Jews, but for the world. Because I think the world needs our difference. And embracing our difference and bringing that difference to the world, that is uncomfortable. It always has been. Bringing monotheism to the world, the idea that there's a moral order to the universe, that every human being is created in the divine image, infinitely worthy and precious, the very idea that is the basis for democracy, human rights, and Western thought itself, that was not comfortable. The people around us were not thrilled when we rejected the idea that might makes right and refused their gods for our own. Kings and pharaohs were not thrilled when we refused to worship kings and pharaohs and instead turned our attentions to orphans, widows, strangers, and the poor. People who insisted that their faith was the only true way, they didn't like it when we refused to abandon our God, our story, and each other, when we insisted on our difference. All of that was uncomfortable. And today, more than ever before, the world needs our difference. When it comes to so many of the challenges we face, Jewish tradition offers wisdom that we desperately need. And not just Jews, all of us. At a time when our public conversation, particularly on social media, is so stupid and polarized, filled with people claiming that they have the one truth and everyone else is evil and wrong, Jewish tradition demands that we hold and wrestle with opposing truths. The Torah tells us to love the stranger, the non-Jew, to welcome the stranger. But it also tells us to remember Amalek. Remember the Amalekites, the tribe that attacked the Israelites when they were weak. So love the stranger, but remember that some strangers want to kill you. Be open-hearted, but don't be naive. We have to hold both of these truths and wrestle with them. We live at a time when our society tells us that some of the most fundamental aspects of human existence, aging, grief, illness, death, are to be avoided at all costs. That hospitals are creepy, mourners make us uncomfortable, dead bodies are gross. We have an instinct to run from such people and places. Best to just send flowers, maybe a text. But Jewish tradition says, no, you run right to them. You get yourself to that hospital bedside, to that shiva. In those liminal moments, when those thin spaces, when the boundaries between life and death, heaven and earth thin out, and when people are the most lost and disoriented, we're told to accompany them, to hold them in loving community. At a time when it's trendy to divide people up into crude, dehumanizing categories, oppressor, oppressed, powerful, powerless, and to love or hate them accordingly, Jewish law says just the opposite. Our ancient rabbis present us with endless, hyper-specific scenarios. What do we do about this person with this need in this circumstance at this time? What if you've loaned someone money and you know they can't afford to pay you back, and you happen to see them coming down the street towards you a few weeks later? What should you do? Well, according to Jewish tradition, you should turn around and walk the other way. You should try to avoid running into that person, because to do so would embarrass them. It would remind them of their debt to you. Why such specific guidance? Why can't we just say, help the poor, and leave it at that? It's because with each specific example, Jewish law is urging us to develop an exquisite sensitivity to the needs and vulnerabilities and dignity of this person before us. It's like going to the eye doctor when they click that little vision machine to make your vision finer and finer. That's Jewish moral vision. It means really seeing this person before us, understanding that they are not a category or a label, they are an entire world, and we need to treat them accordingly. Jewish tradition calls on us to reject the narcissism and hyper-individualism of modern society. It's not just about you do you, but about we do we. It's not just about finding ourselves, but about finding each other, going beyond self-care to self-restraint and self-sacrifice and self-transcendence. This isn't easy, and it's not comfortable, but comfort is not the Jewish mission in the world. Building a society that is the exact opposite of ancient Egypt, a society where every single person is treated as an image of the divine, that is the Jewish mission in the world. And our sacred texts are filled with stories of our ancestors learning to embrace this discomfort. We're told that the ancient Israelites accepted that covenant with God at Mount Sinai by saying, we will do and we will hear. The doing, the leap of action, as Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel called it, that came first. The Israelites joined this partnership with God and took on this massive list of responsibilities before they even understood what that meant. Wasn't comfortable. This is this discomfort of Nachshon, who, according to our rabbis, stood with the Israelites at the edge of the sea with the Egyptians closing in. And while Moses pled with God to split the sea, Nachshon didn't wait for divine intervention, just plunged right in. And only when he was nearly in over his head did God intervene to part the waters. Near drowning, not comfortable. And I have to tell you, I have seen this same courage and determination today from Jews all across the globe. I've seen it in the college students I've met as I've visited nearly 30 campuses across America. There was the young woman who told me that she runs a campus dance troupe, and one of the dancers quit and tweeted, and I quote, "Just quit my Zionist-led dance group." But this young woman retorted, "Please," as if I was making them dance to Hatikva. And then there was the young man who, after recounting all of the abuse he'd gotten from his classmates, said, "And you know what I'm going to do?" Now, his tone made me a little nervous, so I asked, What are you going to do?" And he replied, "I am going to be the loudest, proudest Jewish Jew they have ever seen." And then there was the solidarity trip I did just a few months after October 7th. Now, I expected that the Israelis that we met would be traumatized. I assumed that they would be grieving and heartbroken, and they were. What I didn't expect was that they would be funny, but they were. There was the young man who lost his brother in a massacre at their kibbutz, who told us that he was heading to the US for a speaking tour. "I hope," he said, "to convince Americans to be only as anti-Semitic as absolutely necessary." There was the disaster relief expert who briefed us on his work, and when someone mentioned anti-Semitism on campus at Berkeley, he replied, "Yes, Berkeley, another kind of disaster area." And then there was a soldier I spoke to who, after I described the agenda of our trip, visits with attack survivors, IDF widows, hostage families, he replied, "Ah, so you are on sad birthright." I felt like each of them was telling us, we are not going to drown in our trauma and our grief, and you all better not either. Finally, I have seen people of all ages and all Jewish backgrounds showing up to services and classes, to lectures and events, determined to learn more about our story, our tradition, our history. And by the way, I think actually that's the best way to fight anti-Semitism. Because if you have a contentless, empty, void Jewish identity, and someone tells you that Judaism is violent and vengeful with an angry, unloving God, what are you going to say? I like Seinfeld? If they tell you that Israel is a racist, colonialist state, and you don't know anything about Jewish history or Israel, how will you respond? Tikkun olam? If we want to fight against anti-Semitism, we need to know what we're fighting for. We need to know our story. And we need to remember not just who we are, but what we are. We are not just a religion, nor are we a race or an ethnicity. Jews are of all different races and ethnicities. We are something so much older and so much more enduring. We are a tribe, a civilization, a nation, a peoplehood, but most of all, a family. And when we saw Guy and Evyatar embracing each other, we saw our brothers reunited. When we lost Rachel and John's son and so many other sons and daughters, those were our kids. When we hear Eli Sharabi's breathtaking story of survival, we recognize that as a family story. It's the story of so many of our ancestors. Now, that Supreme Court case about the football coach, I think that case is wrong, and you will never convince me otherwise. But I also think that it is not the worst thing in the world to be a young Jew standing separate at the 50-yard line who says, "I'm different. This is not how I pray, and I don't have to impose my way on anyone else, because my tradition is big enough to hold both my difference and everyone else's. And I can stand here, uncomfortable, but fully at home in something so much bigger, knowing who I am and from whom I descend, knowing the story and mission of my people, and knowing that it's my story, my mission too. And maybe that Jewish kid will inspire others to stand up and embrace their difference as well. Because we are not the only ones with unique moral wisdom to offer the world. So many others have their wisdom, their moral vision, and we need their difference too. So feeling left out, feeling different, it's not the worst thing in the world. The worst thing in the world would be to forget who we are. The worst thing in the world would be for us to stop telling our story. So let's learn and embrace our story. Let's honor our ancestors who held fast to that story generation after generation and sacrificed so much to hand it down to us. Let's be proud, passionate, learned Jews, Jews who are different, Jews who are uncomfortable, and Jews who work every day to fulfill our mission in the world. Thank you.
Please welcome Tamar Ish-Shalom and Ambassador Dan Shapiro.
Shalom. I want to say good morning, but nearly good afternoon. Shalom, Dan.
Shalom, Tamar.
As the Polish poet Wisława Szymborska once wrote, after every war, someone has to clean up. Things won't straighten themselves up after all. Photogenic, it's not, and takes time. All the cameras have left for another war. We are living in those moments, in those days, the days after the war. And in a communal sense, the big questions that emerged for American Jewry right after October 7th and over these past 2 years, they're still here with us. We've all changed as individuals and as a community, and yet in some ways we've stayed the same. So in the next hour, we'll try to take a close look at this unique moment in history when it seems like the war is over. Hopefully, it really is over. But the future still feels uncertain. Who are we now? And who do we want to become? And we're very fortunate to explore these questions with Ambassador Dan Shapiro, a diplomat, policy expert, and former U.S. ambassador to Israel, serving under President Barack Obama from 2011 to 2017. He played a central role in strengthening the U.S.-Israel relationship, advancing security cooperation, and deepening strategic ties between the two countries. Shalom, Dan.
Hello.
I think about in all our encounters, yes, feel free. We've usually met on TV when you were the ambassador and I was the news anchor, so it was Ambassador Shapiro. Now that we're here with the mishpuche, is Dan okay?
Dan is great.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let's start with a question that's philosophical, but at the same time, it's deeply political. What does it mean to be an American Jew today?
Well, I took great inspiration from Sarah Hurwitz's definition of what our people's mission and what our people, our traditions call for today. First of all, thank you to everyone with Z3 for inviting me here, and thank you, Tamar. We were also supposed to be joined by my friend and colleague Jason Greenblatt, whose travel was disrupted, so I'll do my best to cover both sides.
We heard that in the back rows. We heard
and
that.
maybe that's part of being an American Jew these days, right? Both of those words in that phrase are deeply important. I grew up believing first and foremost that in my family, our Jewish identity, the knowledge of the traditions that Sarah spoke of, the deepening of those connections within our community, locally, nationally, internationally, and obviously with our compatriots in Israel, was at the center of what our responsibility was, how we should live our lives, the teachings, the traditions, the connections to that people of which we are a part. And I also grew up in a family that believed that we were given an enormous gift to be citizens of the greatest democracy in the world, of a country where our freedom and the freedom of all citizens and even non-citizens is guaranteed by our Constitution, by our founding documents, by our founding traditions, by our laws, and that is something else to be cherished and nurtured. And so I believe to be an American Jew today is to hold both of those responsibilities. to hold both of those truths and to try to work to uphold and further and fulfill what that mission calls for. Of course, we're doing so in a time when Israel has been obviously attacked in the worst possible way on October 7th, the worst attack against Jews since the Holocaust, and has had to fight for its survival and fight for its security and fight to recover its hostages and its citizens. That is something that imposes great responsibility on American Jews to provide support in that struggle, which I think we have done a great deal of, and there's always more to do. We're also living in a period when our own democracy is as divided as I can ever recall in my life, in which we hear tones of discord and tones of even illiberalism and maybe even authoritarian impulses from more than one direction, putting at risk some of those very freedoms that are core to the American experience, and in certain ways that particularly threaten us as Jews, as the voices of anti-Semitism are heard from more than one direction. So those are responsibilities in this moment, but we have a lot to draw on. We have a lot of strengths. Sarah spoke of many of them, and I think we have as many in the American experience as we have in the Jewish experience, and so we should hold to both and work to advance both.
You know that a few months ago, I spoke on my podcast with Dan Senor, and he described the current state of American Jewry as prominent but weak. It has thrived and flourished. American Jews have visible and successful almost in every field in the United States, but he argues that we're not powerful, and October 7th exposed that. Why, he says? We woke up that morning and our allies weren't there, most of them, and even after all the money and the philanthropy and academic excellence, the university that we helped to build, they didn't feel any urgency to protect us on campus as a minority. So he says, he argues, we're prominent but weak. What's your take on Dan's rather provocative observation?
I think he has a basis for that argument, and I also think I'm not as pessimistic as that description would convey. We have still many institutions in this country where our voices are heard, where Jewish citizens are able to take part. That's maybe the prominence he speaks of. It's up to us to be proud and bold and not cowed and not intimidated by voices that might try to attack us or intimidate us or treat Israel as a source of illegitimacy for itself or for us as Jews or as American citizens. So we have a lot of the question about whether we are weak will depend very much on us. There's no doubt that we've heard and seen disturbing, very disturbing things on campuses and in other locations, but it's not everywhere. At the same time as we've heard and seen those types of very discomforting moments by people who treat us as less than full citizens, by people who treat Israel as some sort of source of illegitimacy. We've also, he spoke of allies. We have allies. I know them. I worked with many of them in government. I still work with many of them in politics outside of government. I believe the current administration, with which I disagree on many subjects, is a partner and an ally. And while one can point to 10 or 12 or 20 campuses where there were very, very ugly scenes of protesters attacking Israel and attacking even Jewish students and Jewish faculty, there's dozens more, hundreds more, where that was not happening.
But then that's not news, so we don't see that.
You never see that. You never see that. And there are many places where it might be that a Jewish student will say, this is not the year I'm going to apply to those colleges. I'm not going to name colleges by name, but there are many places where we are welcome, we are still treated as family and as full members of the community. So, but a lot will depend on us, how we position ourselves. Do we treat ourselves as under attack, or do we treat ourselves as full citizens with every right to express ourselves with full pride in our identity, our dual identities, and stand up to the bullies, and then rally our allies to stand with us?
And the war may be over, but many American Jews feel a sense of unease as if the political aftershocks will keep echoing. And, on the left, we now have a new mayor-elect of New York who openly opposes Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. And he hasn't paid any political price for that, maybe even the opposite. And on the right, we've just heard deeply troubling statements from the head of the Heritage Foundation, and more broadly, some very outspoken anti-Semitic people speaking out loud. And do you think that American politics and the place of Jews within it is changing before our eyes on both sides of the aisle?
It's undeniable that we're hearing these tones creeping in from the fringes of both sides of the aisle. It's undeniable. You spoke about the mayor-elect of New York City, who says he will stand with the Jewish community against anti-Semitism, but is blind to the fact that his own statements about Israel's illegitimacy as a Jewish state are in some ways fueling many of those same attitudes toward Jews, and certainly creating a situation where Jewish institutions and even Jewish citizens of that city feel under attack or under duress by people who want to delegitimize their very mission. He's been presented with a list of demands from some of his supporters, a full menu of BDS ways that New York will distance itself from the state of Israel. Let's see what he does. I don't think we know yet, now that he has been elected and holds that office, by a fairly slim margin, frankly, considering, he was the Democratic nominee of a heavily Democratic city. There are clearly people, and he should know this, who are uncomfortable with aspects of his program. Let's see, is he more committed to his agenda of affordability? I'm not sure all of his solutions to that are the bright solutions either, but let's see if he's more committed to that or more committed to this very ideological path that certain people among his allies may be pushing him toward. I don't know. Of course, you mentioned on the other side of the aisle, we've seen and heard some very disturbing things from prominent podcasters, prominent commentators, and they clearly have some reach into the base of the Republican Party, of this administration. And it's impossible. We also hear very strong, outspoken statements against that. I'm not often find myself in deep agreement with Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, but I think he's been fantastic in identifying the anti-Semitism in his camp on the right and calling it out and saying it's completely unacceptable. We, again, goes back to the earlier comment. We have allies, and we have plenty of allies in both parties on both sides of the aisle, but we can't allow complacency to set in and say, well, we'll manage those extreme voices in our own camps. No, they have to be called out, and particularly their policies and their ideas have to be combated from within our own political camps. So there's work to do. The same day, I'll speak with my own side, of course, the same day that Mamdani was elected mayor of New York, two governors were elected in New Jersey and Virginia who were from a very different wing of the Democratic Party. Yeah, it's worth acknowledging.
From the mainstream of the Democratic Party.
Very mainstream, very centrist. Neither of them spoke much about Israel during their campaigns, as you'd expect, but their congressional records suggest they're very much in the mainstream of understanding that Israel is a partner, Israel is an ally. No citizen, Jewish or otherwise, should be ostracized or criticized for promoting a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. So I think there's much to work with, even as I recognize there's responsibilities, just as Senator Cruz has taken on, there's responsibilities on my side to make sure that that is the predominant strain. Even if we have disagreements with Israel, criticism of Israeli policy, always legitimate, but not to the extent of delegitimization and anti-Semitism.
As you mentioned, Jason Greenblatt was supposed to join us, and he's not here, but we had a great prep conversation that unfortunately you all missed. And what I want to mention from that was really fascinating for me to hear is the moment in which he said how much shared grounds he found with you in conversations you had, and how important that was from him, that when it comes to Israel and to the Jewish community, there's a lot of views that the both of you can share, and obviously you agreed with him, so he's not here with us today to discuss it, but could you talk a bit about that, because I think that's so important to pause on in these days.
Yeah, Jason and I spoke together on a panel with the American Jewish Committee at the UN General Assembly just about 5-6 weeks ago. And the subject was, as the war seems to be ending, the deal had not actually been struck yet, but there was momentum toward it. Can we get back on the road toward building out the Abraham Accords, towards expanding the regional integration, towards helping Israel and the moderate Arab states, all U.S. partners, deepen their coalition and take advantage of this moment when the Iranian axis is as weak as it's ever been, and really try to move in that direction. And while he pursued that work and successfully, and I gave him great credit for it, and his colleagues during the first Trump administration, which I was not a fan of on many issues, and I continued to do work on that during the Biden administration, which I'm sure he and many of his colleagues were not a fan of. It was he who said, you know, the Venn diagram between us has about 80 or 90% overlap, and there are differences at the margins, and you know, we should hold to our differences as well. But that agenda of seeing Israel as a critical component of U.S. national security interests. Just imagine if the United States and Israel drifted apart, as some call for, and some call for on both sides of the aisle, and the U.S. security commitment to Israel was no longer what it was, and what we, in my time as ambassador, helped to advance with a $38 billion memorandum of understanding, and what other administrations have done as well. Just imagine if other countries in the region, both our friends and our adversaries, start to see us drift apart. What will happen? The adversaries will gain strength and encouragement. They will continue their effort already underway to rebuild and become sources of attack and violence and aggression in the region and beyond the region. Our friends, the Arab moderate states, will say, well, you know, if the United States is not standing with its closest ally, then what do we need from these normalization agreements? What do we need from this coalition? We will start to hedge. We will look for opportunities to work with various partners. We'll cut our own de-escalation agreements with Iran. We'll figure out how to work with Russia and China. Egypt and Jordan, if Israel is not at the core of the U.S. policy, are not going to be very popular recipients of U.S. assistance. Egypt and Jordan will be destabilized or turn also to Russia and China. The moment that the United States and Israel drift apart, this is apart from the moral interest, very profound moral interest the United States has to stand with Israel. But on the strategic interest, the moment we drift apart is the moment our influence and our interests in the Middle East decline dramatically. So what's the alternative? The alternative is A, ensuring Israel always has the right and ability to defend itself, especially when we've seen the kinds of attacks it suffered, first from Hamas, then from Hezbollah, then from the Houthis, then from Iran. And standing with Israel as it fights to defend itself against all of those adversaries, as we did during the Biden and during the Trump administrations in different ways. That's the first thing. And the second thing is to say we have a huge opportunity, just a massive opportunity, to take the progress that was arrested during the war after October 7th, but that had begun with the Abraham Accords, with the Negev Forum, with the opportunities for Israelis and Arabs all across the region to build partnerships in energy and water and tourism and health and defense and agriculture and all sorts of technology. And on people-to-people level, the thing that will really give Arab leaders confidence that this is something that serves not only their country's interests, but even their political interests, that they can survive it. To take advantage of this moment when all of those countries, U.S. partners all, are aligned and see that pathway open, and take advantage of this moment when Iran and its partners and allies are as weak as they've ever been, and drive that forward. If President Trump and Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and whoever else is working on that team are successful in that, I will give them 100% support and full credit. If another administration carries that forward 3 years from now, I hope and expect that Jason Greenblatt and his friends would also support what we're doing. So that is that's the 90% overlap in that Venn diagram.
You're describing the 90%, and from knowing both of you, I can say that I think that you can share these views because both of you are on the one side deeply ideological, but at the same time you're moderate. But we're living in times of extremism in politics, and it's true to the US, it's true to Israel, it's true to the whole world right now. And that really raises the question in the past 2 years about the tent. Who's inside the tent and who's outside the tent? What do we tolerize as a Jewish community, and what we don't, and we say this is the red line. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, obviously, anti-Semitism for principled and for, you might say, more practical reasons is unacceptable. And anti-Semitism has to be understood, I think, broadly. Obviously, it is the attacks on Jewish people or attacks on the rights or the ability of Jewish people to fully participate in society, to be safe, to be proud, to be public about their identification. That, of course, is out of bounds. But the kind of anti-Zionism that suggests that the Jewish people, almost in a singular way, are ineligible for self-determination in their historic homeland. Even if you disagree with certain policies or certain leaders of the Israeli government, that is not the issue. The issue is the legitimacy of that state to exist, because you somehow define the Jewish people as uniquely ineligible for that. That is also anti-Semitism. And again, we hear those voices from more than one direction in the political discussion these days. It's the responsibility of our own community, of political leaders within our respective sides of the aisle to identify that and call it out. There are, as I said, there are legitimate things one can say about Israeli policy, and there are legitimate criticisms of Israeli leaders. I mean, we hear about them from Israelis more than we hear about them from almost anybody else. And so there's no reason one can't have an open and honest discussion about where those differences occur. I was in Israel for most of August and September. It was before the big breakthrough on the hostage deal, and I heard dramatically, I'd say angry, bitter comments from so many Israeli friends. And I would go to Hostage Square, and I would hear deep dissatisfaction about the Israeli leadership and about Israeli policy choices. So it's legitimate to have that conversation, but you've got to draw the line between those types of policy differences and a fundamental attack on the legitimacy of a Jewish state in any borders.
And we should sure applaud for that. But the last few weeks have tested both parties and their leadership. And I'll really just take two examples, but there's many of them. On the right, we saw Tucker Carlson's interview, and afterwards, the Heritage presidents saying, and we didn't see all Republican leaders criticize and really call that out. And on the other hand, we read about a phone call that President Obama had done to Mamdani. Actually, that was the second call, in which he praised the campaign as well. And that, anyway, if we have these extremes, but we don't have the politicians that will, stand up and say, I will not tolerate that, where are we heading? And just personally, because when I have deep appreciation to all American presidents as an Israeli, Republicans, Democrats, when I heard about that conversation with President Obama, I had this kvetch in the stomach.
Yeah. So I obviously don't know what took place on that phone call. Was not on it, not in any kind of regular touch with President Obama. Here's what I can say. The lines that I described earlier about delegitimizing Israel's very existence or the very notion of a Jewish state as a legitimate expression of the self-determination of the Jewish people, to me is a red line. So I would hope that any leader, President Obama or any other leader in our party, speaking to Mr. Mamdani, would make clear that that is a position that will put him well outside the mainstream. I've noticed how several prominent New York politicians did not endorse him or endorsed him very late and very quietly and in a perfunctory way, as if to say, this is not us, and we're signaling we're going to keep at arm's length at best something that we find deeply troubling and deeply offensive. Now, there are things to learn even from a campaign like his, which included these very disturbing attitudes. his energy, his motivation of young people, his focus on affordability. Again, I'm not sure the solutions he applies from his democratic socialist agenda are the right solutions to that, but it at least speaks to something that we know motivated also the campaigns of Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger, that is the main issue on the agenda. So there may be something to learn, how to communicate, what to communicate about from the campaign, and it's possible that seasoned leaders can help elicit the lessons from that type of campaign and also provide guidance to steer away from the extremism that is also part of the agenda and also, has to be said, part of his base, part of his coalition. There were all sorts of strange things about this campaign, including the the terrible alternatives to vote for. I think had I been a citizen of the state of New York, of the city of New York, I probably would have held my nose and voted for one of the alternatives, but I would have really had to hold my nose. And so there's a lot of reasons why we shouldn't extrapolate too much from a mayoral candidate winning just about 50% in a very democratic city with very unique demography that doesn't replicate itself all over the country, and certainly not in the swing states and districts that are likely to determine, which party controls future Congresses or future administrations. So there's a lot that we shouldn't over extrapolate from that. But having that open line to say, let's build on the positives and let's push to the margins the negatives is something worth thinking about. What I know about President Obama from the time I served with him, again, not about this conversation, was that he, under his instructions, we negotiated a $38 billion 10-year memorandum of understanding to ensure Israel had the means to defend itself for a decade, that he approved Israel's acquisition of the F-35 aircraft, that he provided the first funding for Iron Dome, and then for David Sling, and then for the Arrow systems that have saved so many lives over this year, that he ensured that our intelligence sharing and that our joint training of our militaries accelerated and expanded well beyond what they had been when he took office, and they continued on beyond that under the next two administrations, now three administrations. So if he is bringing to those conversations his record, his history, his understanding about how that reflects both American values and interests, that could be a positive for a young, early in his career mayor to hear that maybe one of the heroes of the party from an earlier era has something to teach me as well. So I would hope that will be the case, and I will certainly watch for that to be the case.
Okay. We live in an era of depolarization, and obviously it seeps into the Jewish community too. How do you see polarization playing out within our community, and can we overcome it, or as long as polarization is out there within the whole American society, eventually it will seep into the Jewish community as well?
Yeah, we're not immune from those broader societal trends. I mean, all of us are now captive to the way information is expressed and projected and consumed on social media and on our phones, with built-in mechanisms and algorithms to deepen the polarization, to make you mad, to reinforce your own strongly held views again and again, to exclude and denigrate the views of others. So that, of course, seeps into our own internal Jewish community conversation. It also is part of how we exist as Jews in the broader society. And we can't be blind to that. Again, I take great wisdom from Sarah's remarks that even though it is our Jewish tradition to fight and to argue and to disagree, and it's all in the Talmud, the way the rabbis struggled over every question, and there was always a Hillel and always a Shammai, and always different perspectives on the same question, and sometimes even competing truths that you have to find a way to hold. The fact that you hold a stone in one pocket that says, "I am but dust and ashes," and another stone that says, "But for me the world was created." The fact that we have to know how to be focused on our own Jewish community survival and thriving and carrying forward our traditions, and how we exist in that broader society, that to me should pull us closer together, should help us resist the most extreme voices in our own community and in the broader society as well. It's not always easy. We're all human. We're all subject to the emotions of those pulls. But that is a responsibility, and that is also consistent with the Jewish tradition.
Let's add a layer to our opening question. What does it mean to be an American Jew today? What does it mean to be a friend of Israel today as an American Jew?
Well, I start with the fundamentals, which we've spoken about. Israel is the fulfillment of centuries, even millennia, of Jewish longing to have a homeland or a sovereignty in our historic homeland. And it goes to the Bible, it goes to our liturgy, it goes to the centuries of exile, and it's an expression of something not only that we've dreamed of and longed for, but that history shows very clearly what happens when you don't have it. The tragedies of thousands of years of Jewish exile, there was beauty in that history as well, but many tragedies, many pogroms, many attacks, and of course a Shoah, the ultimate expression of that. And so the need to have the need and the legitimacy of that homeland in that place where Jews are always safe and always can determine their own future, to me is a baseline. If you don't believe in that, it's hard to say you're a friend of Israel, for sure. Now, if you believe that, then you can have, as Israelis do, very profound debates about Israeli policy on the Palestinian issue, on how the war in Gaza was conducted, on how the approach to recovering hostages was prioritized, on what happens in the West Bank, on the building of settlements, on internal questions about judicial reforms and the separation of powers among different parts of the Israeli government, on Israel's approach to other neighbors that have attacked it and how it defends itself and how it positions itself against those threats as well. There's room to debate all of it. And again, you only have to go and sit in a cafe in Tel Aviv to know that Israelis who fight and bleed and die for their country are prepared to have those debates and come to very different conclusions. So I don't think there's much that can be excluded from what friends of Israel can say and discuss and argue and think about. But it does start with that fundamental. Do you support Israel's existence and legitimacy? Do you support Israel's ability to defend itself? Do you recognize that the United States benefits? This is not a one-way altruistic kind of relationship.
Not philanthropy.
It's not philanthropy. That's absolutely right. If the United States did not have in Israel, and this is something President Biden said many, many times before and while he was president, we'd sort of have to invent it for the way our interests are advanced in the region and even broadly because of that, and the sharing of technology and intelligence and training. Now, we have had big differences, and of course many people in the United States are legitimately concerned about the toll on Palestinian civilians in Gaza. It's legitimate. I argue that the party mainly responsible for that is Hamas, which has prioritized its ideological crusade to destroy the state of Israel, to kill Jews, over the well-being of its own people. I was the first American official ever to go into a Hamas tunnel, an attack tunnel that was dug under the border in 2013. And to see in this miserable, dark, cold, buried place what someone would do to drag dirt a kilometer back into Gaza and drag cement a kilometer under Israel just so that they would have the opportunity to fulfill that mission to attack Israel. That's the organization that has subjected the people of Gaza to, and then fought within them and used them as human shields more than any other actor. Just as the Iranian regime has squandered probably close to $1 trillion of resources while it has armed proxies that could pose threats and actually attack Israel, while it has pursued a nuclear weapons program intended to be able to fulfill its vision, its ideological crusade of destroying Israel. So we have to understand that is the region Israel lives in. Those are the adversaries it faces. But it doesn't mean a friend of Israel can't also say, I am concerned. And this is something we did to say in the Biden administration, I think unquestionably a friend of Israel, that how one fights those enemies, how one takes care to minimize to the maximum extent possible that civilians who are innocent are not caught in that crossfire, that the maximum amount of humanitarian assistance can reach those people so that their needs are met, because their own leaders will never care for them. But there is a moral obligation on our side, American side, Israel's side, to try to do that. Those are very legitimate conversations to have well within the tent of friends of Israel.
As long as constructive criticism and loving criticism. Last question. What do you want this wonderful audience of ours today, about to go into a full day of panels and discussions, often hearing things they disagree with, to take from our conversation?
First of all, it's a remarkable gathering. This is my second time at Z3. First was several years ago, and to see the growth and the flowering of this model, what it does for this community here in Palo Alto, but what is now being exported to many, many other JCCs around the country is inspiring. I would ask this wonderful audience to come out of today feeling enormous pride, in pride as Jews, pride as Zionists, pride as Americans, where we can give expression to those other aspects of our personalities and our traditions and our ideology. And to know that, sort of where we started, Tamar, that the most critical determination about whether we will be prominent and weak or prominent and strong is ourselves. And having that pride and not being intimidated and gathering our partners and allies and educating ourselves and educating our younger generation, who, if they only hear what they hear on social media, will not know the depth and the breadth and the nuance of everything that is part of Jewish history, Israeli history, politics in the Middle East, the relationship between the United States and Israel. Those are obligations we take on. But if we take them on, and if we take them on proudly and strongly, I'm very confident in this country. I'm very confident that this country will find its way to its best self, to its best traditions, to the most open, the most welcoming, the most, maybe in some ways the safest place, certainly outside of Israel, that Jews have ever lived. And it can and should and always will be that if we take the lead and do the education internally and externally to help make sure it is so. So I hope our wonderful audience will leave with that task and that purpose.
Amen for that. Thank you very much, Ambassador Shapiro, and thank you